Hello. Okay. So we're ready to start our session. And first, I'd like to thank you for joining us in the Beijing hall of the Moscow Urban Forum today. We're going to have a very diverse set of speakers talking about vanity height. How tall can vertical cities get? With more than half of the world's population living in cities today, we can understand that cities are the main drivers of economical growth. And this is what we get by bringing together millions and millions of people together. This creates opportunities, this generates innovation, this generates access to different kinds of economy, but it also poses very big challenges. How do we regulate the surface, the density, the transport, but also how do we regulate the height? That is not just a technical aspect, but it is also something that we could relate to vanity, because tall buildings have the possibility to become the icons of the city. So that also brings an interesting responsibility. Today, we're going to discuss this with the developers and the architects who materialize these vertical cities, and also with the governments who set the framework and the rules for the verticality to happen. Before we begin our discussion, I want to introduce you to our speakers. Yan Xiaolong from Shanghai, from the Shanghai Municipal Commission of Housing, Urbanism, Rural Development and Management. With Ahmad Abdelsarak, the Executive VP of High-Rise Building and Structural Engineering of the Samsung City Corporation, who is behind the tallest building in the world. We also have Elena Ilukina, the General Director of the LACTA Center Development in St. Petersburg. Mikhail Kebesko, the Executive Director of the Capital Group. Michael Ashley, Principal and Design Architect at Studio Daniel Libeskind from New York. And Anton Nadotsky, the CEO of a Moscow-based Atrium Architecture Studio. Well, I want to start asking Mr. Xiaolong. Shanghai is one of the most densely populated cities in the world, which is often seen as the image of the future, as we can see in many movies. And that is also where we see the skyscrapers of Shanghai. And I want to ask you, how can you relate this vertical development with the Shanghai economy?
那个主持人好，各位听众好，非常乐意回答这个第一个问题。那么我们这个城市高度和一个城市的经济发展之间的关系，那么毫无疑问，这个城市的高度和我们城市的经济发展有着紧密的联系。
Нету. Ничего, нет звука.
那么人口的不断的涌入，那么再加上我们建设用地的减少，所以这个高层建筑的兴起是不可避免的。所以拿上海来举例。
As the number of population is growing, we build more and more high-rise buildings. This is irreversible trend. Starting from this openness reform, the residential development in Shanghai is on the rise, and the high skyscrapers, the high-rise buildings in the 80s. In 1980s, we had 121 high-rise buildings, and in 2010, as a result of rapid construction, a number of these buildings exceeded 40,000. The total footage amounted to 396 million square meters. Speaking about the development area, the total construction area, as I mentioned, is 396 square meters. This is an enormous figure. And recently, the construction of high-rise buildings and control of the height of these high-rise buildings was revised. The approach was revised. In 1998, we built one of the most important skyscrapers, Dinmao Tower. The number of stories is 88. And counting the top, it's 93 stories, 420 meters tall. Financial center was built in 2008. And number of stories is 102, and the height is 492 meters. For 6 years, we built Shanghai Tower, and in 2014, we completed this construction project, and this building has 118 stories, 632 meters. This is one of the highest buildings in the world. And recently, over the course of recent years, the high-rise construction is under very rapid development. At the same time, we have issues and problems, and this is related to the environment. We need to build additional infrastructure. Public spaces is a challenge for us. In 2003, the People's Government of Shanghai, despite the fact that we reached great success in high-rise construction, still we realized that this is not just an economically efficient policy, but there are challenges on this way. That's why the government of Shanghai devised the program to reduce high-rise construction, and at the same time we decided to increase the following areas. We decided to build more plants and enlarge the public spaces. And we decided to reduce the volume of construction and reduce the height of the buildings. And our cities need to be such that we can see sky, we can see the horizon. This is what we want to see. They need to be comfortable and livable for human beings. And just as you mentioned, our high-rise construction is growing in connection with the economy, and it needs to be balanced. It needs to meet the demands of residents living in the area. Our president said that our parks and public spaces need to grow in harmony with the construction growth rate to make our city livable. This is the prospect for our city to be developed.
Thank you, Mr. Abdelrazak, the Samsung City Corporation is behind the world's tallest tower of today, and it is a project that is very related to the change of the Dubai economy from oil into financial services, tourism, and commerce. How is the project part of this change of this development, and also how has this project embraced the technical challenge that building the tallest tower in the world bring with it?
Well, I think first
No, you
okay. Can you hear me now? This?
Now it works.
Obviously, I actually made a small presentation
Yes.
just to talk about the vanity of height and what does it mean in terms of the city planning and some of the important points. But before I start my presentation, I would just talk about the significance of Dubai to Dubai itself and to the region in general.
1 second while they fix the microphone.
Okay.
And now we have your presentation.
Okay. Let me talk about the presentation and I'll come back to Dubai.
Perfect.
Okay. Obviously, the topic is the vanity of height and how tall can a vertical city get. Oops, it's not working. Next slide. Okay, when you talk about the vanity of height, obviously we see many of the tallest buildings in the world. Again, people are trying to achieve the tallest building. Again, the cost of this extra height on the building is not that expensive relative to the benefit that you get out of it. Because when you do these tall buildings height, what I call these fashionable hats, essentially it created an icon to the city, something to remember. So if we stop every building at its floor height, you really cannot distinguish the building very well. So I think this is the iconic nature of these buildings, is to buy an address as an important part. As you can see, for example, in Burj Al Arab, which is one of the most significant buildings in Dubai, before Burj Khalifa, 39% of the height is not occupied. It's just completion of the design to make building, like I said, an iconic. The cost of it is not that much, actually. And the next slide, so essentially if you look at where are the buildings that has the highest number of buildings that have just height. As you can see, in the early 1900s, you have the Empire State Building and Chrysler buildings and so on and so forth. They just, it's just really part of the completion of the building. It's more of an iconic nature of it. In the 1950s and 60s, it's a structuralist period in which people didn't really care about the height, they cared about the efficiency, the functionality of the building. And today, if you can see after 2000, race for height has begun. Went from the west to the east. So what you can see here is a significant number of buildings that has an unnecessary height in China and the Middle East in particular. The next slide is just just talk about the skyscrapers. Have the power to capture the human imagination because of their scale, nature, the symbolic nature, and also technologies, because tall buildings is all about technology and the potential to be an iconic representation of city. We do remember cities by their skyscrapers. For example, the birth of skyscraper is in Chicago, as an example, Sears Tower, Hancock Building. We remember Hong Kong, Pearl of Asia. Again, this is one of the most sustainable cities in the world in terms of economics. Then we have, New York, we remember by World Trade Center and also the hub of financial hub. There's something, this is a lack of, sorry about that. Can you advance? The next one, it seems very difficult with this. Can you advance it to the, okay. Singapore, obviously, again, is a very important city in terms of, in the 50 years, they built a new city that's also a financial hub of what a modern city can be in every aspect. Next slide. Next slide, please. Again, Shanghai is a new financial hub of Asia. Next slide. Again, we have Seoul, Korea. They didn't have many tall buildings. But one of the projects that you can see here is that just completed is a Lotte Tower and also the Yongsan Land Development Park, which is it's an important project. Next. Burj Dubai. Again, this is one of the most significant buildings in the region. When the project started, there was nothing. And this project brought a huge amount of technologies to Dubai, both in terms of the visionary is to make Dubai that's run out of oil into more an economic center for the entire city, and they have to have an alternative way of building. As you can see, this Dubai since 2000 had become actually the attention of every architect in the world. The next one is Kuala Lumpur. Obviously, their vision is also the same. Next. Now St. Petersburg obviously is a very historic city. It's at the verge of expanding into a new area, for example, through the Lakta Center, which can complement this city. It's just similar to what Singapore can bring. Next. Again, what we see today is buildings that are iconic, unique, but they have to be sustainable. But these buildings are not that expensive, so you're buying an address. Next. 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 Again, sustainability is a very, very important aspect. Denser cities tend to be more sustainable, such as Hong Kong and Singapore. US cities, they are not that sustainable because of widespread, which we cannot do. Next. This is an example. If we were to build Burj Dubai with the same area, we can no longer expand horizontally. From sustainability standpoint, we have to go vertically. Next. This is the project when we started in Burj Khalifa. There was nothing in there. Next. This is what has become over a period from 2003 until today. Next. And now the new future for Dubai is a new iconic tower. Again, it's a new development, which is very, very significant project. It's gardens in the sky. This is the next view vision of Dubai. Next. Next. Shanghai, I was very fortunate to work on the first high-rise building in Shanghai, the Jinma Tower, 23 years ago. Next. This is very big building, as you can see here. When we started, there was nothing around it. Next. This is what this site looked like when we first started in the Pudong area of Shanghai. Now, it's an amazing experience for me to work there, and I can speak a lot about, but a huge amount of explosive development in the area. Next. This is when we finished the project. Next. And this is just views of the project. It's very, very important project to the city of Shanghai. Next. And this is what it has become. So think about it from 1992-93, the explosive amount of work that was done, and that required an intensive amount of planning and infrastructure. Next. Next. This is the new hub, which we think is extremely important for the city of St. Petersburg with the Lakta Center. Next. Connectivity, site location, mobility is extremely important. All of these has went into the thinking process of the creation of the Gazprom group. Next. Next. This is here what we see is a Yongsan Land Development Park, again creating a financial hub, which is extremely important, which I believe could be a historic area and a museum of what tall building can be. Next. Next. Connectivity, airport. Next. This is the amount of people that can bring into this development is about 420,000 people. Next. 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 Next, please. Next. I was just skip through the connectivity of the project to the rest of the city, airport, the city center. Next. And this is what the project looked like. It involved some of the best architects in the world. The master development was won by Lipskin, who will be speaking a little bit about the project. And all different architects around the world, the most famous one participated. So it was an iconic project. Next. Next. And next. Next. As you can see, program. Next. All the architects, KBF, Pioni, Gensler, SOM, SDL, Lipskin, everybody participated. Next. 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 Thank you very much. And now back in terms of Dubai, I think in terms of the impact of Dubai and the economic cities, Dubai had gone through astonishing transformation in less than 50 years. It's when they first built the first concrete house in 1956. Today we built the tallest building in the world in a matter of less than 50 years. So again, as you heard from my presentation, tall building equates with symbolism, image of modernity, economic, capitalism, image of power, image of ego. Some of the world 15 tallest building in the world, actually they are in Asia, not in the West. And for example, KL was a symbol of national modernization back in 1990s. For Dubai, it's a completely different vision. As the moderator mentioned, the oil was running out. Dubai needed to modernize. They need to find another way to survive. So its visionaries diversify the economy. Sheikh Mohammed in particular had the vision to create a new global city with the aspiration to be an important city in the global stage. Again, the market itself, it's worth investing, and also to attract business and capital, manufacturing, tourism, logistics, healthcare, education. Again, Burj Khalifa have an impact on the construction in general. I can tell you the amount of technology they brought into the region over a short period of time is unbelievable. It's almost compete with any international company, an international city. So the Burj Dubai is an astonishingly amazing building. It's an elegant, it's sculptural, and it stands for the test. It will stand for the test of time. So Burj Dubai influence on the design of the region. It changed the city. It changed UAE. It shifted the symbolic power of a skyscraper from the Western Wall into the Eastern Wall, and also it challenged the establishment of their own. What can be done better? And Dubai now is still experimenting with the intersection of social and political and economical changes, and its multifunction relation with architects. It gives the architects really a true way to do their best without any limitation. And I think Burj Dubai has grew the tourism in Dubai by more than 11 million people a year, and that speaks for itself.
Thank you, Ahmad.
Thank you.
Ms. Ilukina, the LACTA Center in St. Petersburg will be one of the tallest structures in Europe. And it will bring a modern, astonishing design to a city that we know for its Baroque and neoclassical architecture. How do you think that the LACTA Center will relate to the city of St. Petersburg and project its image for the future?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that in the history of St. Petersburg, each century provided own dominant. The spires of Admiralty or the cathedrals, well, they symbolized the new city in Europe, the column of Alexander. It was a reflection of the reign of the Russian emperor. The height is always development and part of history. And therefore, today, implementing our project, we provide new height to our city, new architectural image. As for the location of LACTA Center, it's at the entrance to the city from the north, on the coast of the Finnish Gulf. Thus, it will open up our city from the sea coast. Well, St. Petersburg was conceived as a sea capital, and as of today, we have not seen it, but today's opportunities enabled to arrange the sea facade of the city. It will be a powerful architectural accent from the sea, and it will be comparable horizontally to the Baltic Sea coast view, and it will definitely combined with old architecture, while architecture is not all in our project. because thanks to our scale and innovation character, our project goes and leads to development of many areas. We have international team, and which means that the city attracts and uses the regional potential, involving local professionals participating in different spheres of construction, and they develop their potential. We also believe that Lahta Center will be a kind of point of growth and development, and new infrastructure will spring up around it. And lastly, which is very important, that today it did take place. Lahta Center is already a site, and it's a place of interest for tourists and for the local population, and which means they need it and it's popular. Thank you.
Mr. Quebesco, Capital Group has developed important buildings in the Moscow International Business Center that have redefined the skyline of the city. So it is beyond developments, and they are becoming icons. So what does the Capital Group hope to achieve with these iconic developments in the city?
Thank you, thank you, David. I think if we look at the chronology of Moscow City as a development, and we look at how we've contributed to it, back in 2010, when we've just completed our first tower project there, the City of Capitals, I think it was a technological breakthrough, it was a regulatory, psychological breakthrough in many respects, and it was truly on its own as a standalone building, a landmark. But our thinking is evolving, and if we look at where we are today and we look at what Moscow City is today, I think there's been a shift from an individual to a collective, in the sense that Moscow City is now the landmark, rather than a particular building being a landmark. And so we look at how we've been able to contribute to that as a whole, as well as you know, the values that made our buildings a success. And we think that the program of the buildings, the function, has played a large part in this, and this is something we look at very carefully today when making our new projects that are high-rise, that are dense, that are very complex, that are all about the balance and the mix of uses, and making sure that there is sufficient retail, amenities, places for people to spend time with. And we see that our buildings live and are alive, and we believe that people make spaces, and we see that working very well in that particular building, for example. So we've kind of followed the thinking of form following function, in the sense that we want to think about how we can make a building a success to the end user first. And the outcome of that in terms of the architecture, we believe, will naturally follow. So on an example of the Oko Tower that we've just recently completed with SOM in Moscow City as well, the facade, for example, the whole architecture of it is a direct sort of result of the ventilation concept of the residential part of the building, where the naturally ventilated vents are placed in the posts of the facade system and create the ripple effect across the whole glazing of the facade. You know, the new project that we're working on now, Capital Towers, adjacent to Moscow City, also is, the architecture of it is very strongly influenced by the program, and it's a very slender, very thin building that is like a set of razors set in this location, and that is influenced through the residential use, the need to naturally light the spaces, and through that the building is very thin proportioned to its height. So to answer your question, we really think that it's about the long-lasting effect of the program, of the population, of how the people use this, integrating these very, very highly dense placed objects in the urban fabric into their context, and that if we can achieve that, then the form and the effect of it having an impact, being a landmark, would naturally follow from that.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Ashley, you have led important projects for Studio Liveskin, especially in European cities, where these tall developments are not alone, and sometimes you are around other skyscraper but important architects, and aesthetics become an important quality for this singularity. But also this aesthetic is important in the context of the European city, where you have an historic fabric, and these tall towers have an important presence in the skyline. So how do you balance the question of density, height, and aesthetics?
Well, that's a very important question. First of all, thank you for inviting me here to share with you a little bit. Just a quick introduction to what we do. We are always looking to balance density and aesthetics along with height, high-rise buildings, low-rise buildings. We tend to be interested in causing a disturbance in the urban fabric or making a hesitation, something that would cause a passerby to pause for a moment and to experience a new form in the context, or a new piece of light, or a new public space. Next slide, please. Next. Sorry, we're interested in the poetics. Architecture as a language, you could see that. But what we see here is the future city. This was seen by Ahmad. This is the Yongsan development in Seoul. And this was done, we at Studio Liveskin won the master plan for this and designed a few of the towers, but along with many other architects. The central tower there is 600 meters. But this was a massive development right in the heart of Seoul on the old train yards there. We can go to the next slide. Just to show you quickly a few other projects that we've realized. On the top corner on the left side is a residential project in Seoul, in Busan. Sorry, in South Korea, in Busan. And then on the bottom below that we have another residential project in Singapore. And so to balance these high rises with low rises, also bringing public spaces and parklands and green ecological spaces around that was very important to us. On the top left we have our housing project in Milan, which I'll also share a central tower that we're working on that goes along with that master plan that we've designed. And then on the bottom corner we have a residential tower in Poland, in Warsaw, that was just recently completed. Next. We've also done the master plan for the World Trade Center in New York, and this is still an ongoing project. Most of it's open to the public now. It's very exciting to see if you haven't been there. But the idea of an ascending skyline, something that's sculptural and figural in the air, while preserving the memorial and giving it back to the public, the footprints of the existing twin towers that fell at 9/11. But we'll move on. We're being pressed. Next, please. So we did a master plan for the City Life Tower in Milan, along with two other architects, Arata Zaki on the right, and then Zaha Hadid on the left. We're in the middle. Next, please. And it was part of a larger development. Again, we tried to densify the buildings, make them taller to open up the public space and to create a parkland for the ground. In the foreground on the bottom, you could see two residential developments. Ours is on the left, and then Zaha Hadid's is on the right, and that's for housing. The three office towers are mostly business-oriented with ground-level commercial. Next. Here you can see the curvature of the tower, ours in the middle from the back. And our idea was to not try to be the tallest, but to bend down and be humbly oriented towards the ground plane, the public realm where the people are. Next, please. Here you can see a closer view, two-story commercial zone at the bottom. Next. Next. A view looking up at it. Next. The top was photovoltaic infused glass panels that also screen the mechanical equipment. Mentioned before, the top floor is, you can see it there, ghosted. There's a lot of building above that which creates these iconic forms. Next. Here's a view of the interior of the lobby space. Next. And there you have the full composition, trying to create something sculptural on the skyline within the heart of an old classical tradition Italian city. Next. This project we're developing with Philippe Journeau and Compagnie de Falsbourg in the south of France in the city Toulouse. And it's also going to be the tallest tower in the Occitanie region down there in the south of France. You can see the canal along here. That's fine. You can go to the next slide. The canal, it's right at the base of the canal and the train station. And our idea was to bring the gardens into the sky, twisting up into the air of the skyscraper, similar as the green space, the public green of the canal twists and winds through the urban fabric of the city. Next. Here's a conceptual sketch of what that is. Next. A different view from the train station. You could see as these green spaces which are accessible from the different uses inside. It's a diverse building. There's hotel, office, and residential with ground floor commercial. And then the very top is reserved also for the public as a restaurant and a sky lounge. It was very important to make the top most prominent views available to anybody who wants to go see them. Next. Quick graphic, you could just see the sky gardens and the balconies and then the different programs, hotel, office, residential, and commercial at the top and bottom. Next, please. And then this is a vista down the main allée, Jean Moirez, which connects the old city to the new city. So we really see this project as a catalyst for development in the future to the new city to the north. And we think that it'll connect the old and the new. Here's another vista from the canal. And next, we'll finish here with the restaurant and the sky lounge at the top and the beautiful vistas of the city below. And there's also going to be the opportunity to see the Pyrenees Mountains in the distance. So we have to balance all of these forces, height, density, aesthetic. I think for us it's important that we create an important architectural moment that tells a story, that really gives people a reason to enjoy the city that they're in. And we hope in the future to do a project here in Moscow with our good friend and partner, Arnaud Dubois. So thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you, Michael. And we're going to close the session with Mr. Nattochi. Anton, the Nescucini residential complex, which is 69 stories tall here in Moscow City, has been called a futuristic development. And how does it speak to a city charged with history, and how does it place itself for the future of Moscow City?
Спасибо, David.
Thank you, David. And would you please launch my presentation? Indeed, while designing for this scale of a project, we need to be focused on future. As architects, we give our own perception, our own vision of the architecture of the future. And there is a flying object, but we need to put a drone maybe here. It's more modern, up to date. But if we go serious, each city determines its own stand towards history, towards height. And as far as Moscow is concerned, Moscow is characterized by a versatile construction and development areas. And appearance of high-rise buildings in the city is quite logical. And our facility is located next to the third transport ring. This is the mid-belt of Moscow at the border. And Of course, while building such a facility, we think, even though it is forward-looking, we also give our tribute to history as well. And there is a shoot of tower next, not far from our building constructivism quarter, and we mix our understanding of the modern, of contemporary, and something which is very organic for historical Moscow. And the quality of life and this quality of spaces that we build. We do not just build a high-rise building or complex of high-rise buildings. We use the concept of a vertical city. What do we mean by this vertical city? To create a high-quality space, we need to have multifunctionality in place and active relations between different functions and integration with nature. Our facility is integrated into the city fabric, and it is connected to recreational areas located next to Moscow River, and 5 hectares of land and 1.5 hectares is occupied by a park. 50% of residential areas, 50% are retail, offices, supermarkets, shopping areas, restaurants, and an important component for us is a cultural facility, a cultural object, which I will mention later. So we merge them, combine them at the 30th floor level, and these are the bridges combining these spaces all together. And the public spaces are located at the level of the 30th floor. We try to ensure connections not just on the ground, but also on height, which is important for the vertical city concept. The centerpiece, the building of such a scale cannot be just a residential or office. We believe this is important to convert our building in a public space of a new kind. The central piece of is a cultural center, new avant-garde, 6,000 square meters total area, and we believe and rely that we will connect this place with the history on the one hand, with the Moscow city history on the one hand, and on the other hand, we want to be forward-looking. It needs to be devoted to creativity, children's creativity, theater, and etc. We are working on the concept. So the city acquires not just a high-rise building, it acquires a new city space, a unique opportunities to take a new look from a new perspective on the city, and the residents can enjoy all this infrastructure and feel closeness to the city, but at the same time to reside in the cutting-edge building. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton.
Спасибо.
I would really like to thank our speakers for showing us how you are positively impacting the skyline of some of the world's most important cities, including Moscow. So a big applause for them. And I'd like to thank the Moscow city government for making this discussion possible and for making this part of the development of the city. So thank you again.